let's turn today to the talent industry and to Jeff Christian. And Jeff, greetings. And can we start by you telling us how you got started? You told me the other day that you started Christian and Timbers when you were 23, but how did you ever, getting started and growing up, presumably here in Cleveland, how did that ever happen? And what was it like in the early days when you first launched into the headhunting business?
Well, thank you, Ben. I'm glad to be here. And thank you for asking me. And I started when I was 23. I was just getting married, and I had sold a little natural food business called Sun Foods, and I wasn't working. And my in-laws thought it would be a good idea at the reception that I had a job. So I went to my dad, who had an employment agency for as long as I could remember, originally in the Leader building and then in the Hannah building on the second floor, right at the corner of, I guess it's Chester and 12 and 12. And I never wanted to be in the recruiting business, but I went to my dad and said, I'd like to come to work with you and we'll franchise out and create this huge company. And he said, well, just cool down. And, I think you ought to go see if you like the business first. And if you do, maybe we can do something together. Never ended up doing something with my dad. I wish I had. Would have been able to spend more time with him. And I started calling around, and I knew nothing about it. I didn't know there was anything called executive search, and I didn't know what anything was called. There's recruiting companies, employment agencies. And I got a job for a guy named Dick Timbers, who owned the Management Recruiters franchise. And along with Jones Day and, other, E&Y had a huge professional service, and still does, Ernst & Young here in town. But so was Management Recruiters, probably the largest at the time. This was in 1980. Management Recruiters was probably the largest franchise in the recruiting business. It was headquartered here, and Alan Schoenberg had started it. I never had a chance to meet Alan when he was running it. I did later, years later. Wonderful man and very smart. And I learned a lot from him through the systems and processes that he had created this mega franchise. And I went to work for Dick Timbers, and I had a small little desk and a pad of paper and a phone book. And there were no computers being used at the time. And I started getting on the phone, and I found that, that there was an area that I really liked, and Alan Bradley was here in town. It was industrial controls. And I somehow picked that company up as a client, and they were willing to work with us on a retained basis. And I spun Christian and Timbers out of Dick's firm. And I needed to have two names because I found out that all the other search firms all had two names, Heidrick and Struggles and Korn Ferry, et cetera. So I asked Dick if I could use his, and he said, yeah, that's fine. So that became Christian and Timbers. And our first three clients were GE, Westinghouse, and IBM, along with Alan Bradley. Dick lent me a little bit of money, and I took my new bride to Milan, Italy. We actually traveled to different places. We went to Milan for the first robotics symposium, and my clients were there, the heads of robotics and automation at General Electric and IBM, not Westinghouse. And we went. That's basically how the company took off. And then we started going into other markets after that, but we got there first, and that became a tradition of Christian and Timbers, was getting into the next new market before our competitors, and then providing a better solution.
Now, when you started, presumably it was just you. So how did the company grow? Where were you officed? And then presumably you added more people, and then how did you had to find the people, and then you had to incentivize them. How did all of that work out?
Well, we were in the Ohio Savings Bank building right next to Corky and Lenny's on Chagrin Boulevard in Beechwood. And Dick gave me like half of his space. And he was an early investor. He put $5,000 in, and I bought him out for about 500 6 months later, because I didn't want to have, he wasn't working in the firm, and it just seemed to make sense in order to move forward. And I hired Chip McCreary, Rob McCreary's brother, if you know the McCreary family, and who my dad knew the McCreary boys, which were Rob's and Chip's parents and uncles, and so from that gender. So my dad introduced me to Chip, and he did great. He was my partner at the very beginning, and he went to Boston and opened up our Boston office, and so we were in that building, and I had the opportunity to use part of Dick's office manager, Barbara Steinfurst, and she was amazing. The company would have never taken off. I'm so miserable administratively. If I hadn't had her to kind of manage me, I don't think the company would have ever taken off. In fact, the core of the company was always the women, administrative assistants, research managers, research project managers. That held the company together. Search guys are a little crazy, they're all over the place, and they need to be managed. And I certainly was one of them.
And then would you, I take it you tried to go to the extent that you could for retained searches. How would that work? Would people they'd pay you a retainer? And explain to us how the search business even works, and how a retained search is different from a non-retained search, etc.
You can't do contingent and retained. You can only do one or the other. It'd be like, in law, working, well, you work contingent in personal injury, but not in personal injury. It'd be like working for free or working for results on a lawsuit or something, a regular, business case, whatever. So you have to, retained is in itself a branding statement, meaning a lot of people that try to get into retained, and we own C-Suite Recruiter, which is the world's leading platform for mentoring, online e-learning platform for search firms. In fact, in about an hour and a half, I'll be teaching live to a group of about 35 search firms from around the world. Some of them are trying to move from contingent to retained. Well, we did that immediately. I realized that you couldn't be a little bit of both. It would hurt your brand. You had to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, now we're retained, and say no to anything contingent. Contingent is you get paid a certain percentage of a person's income when they get hired. Retained is traditionally at 1/3 of the person's first year's annual compensation. So let's just say that it's a $300,000 job. The fee would be $100,000, broken into 3 equal installments of $33,333.33. You get paid the first third upon start. The second generally is paid 30 to 45 days after the first, when your first candidate slate is presented, and it's an acceptable candidate slate. That's become adopted in the industry. That was something that we have started. It used to just be you got paid your second, third in about 30 days with no milestones. And we started calling them progress payments because we believed that we needed to make suitable progress in order to get paid. The final third is upon completion, generally today. But if you know the firm, the final third, the third payment is paid in the third month, and there could be a fourth invoice based on whether or not the compensation is above what you originally anticipated it to be. And at one point, and we're doing it again now, but back in the heyday of the internet, we received 1/3 of the person's first year's total annual compensation, which is traditional. And also 1/3 of their first year's stock options. And that was because of the demand for talent, and being the leaders in technology, we were able to do that. And it looks like we're back in that same market now. In fact, it's probably a factor of 2 to 3 times greater demand than it was during the internet boom. The technology is everywhere now, and there's multiple Silicon Valleys. You've got Silicon Valley, you've got Austin, you got New York, you got Los Angeles, you got Boston, you've got Israel, you've got India. I mean, it's become a global technology market, and it has just exploded.
Now, were you always focused on the technology space, and then would you turn away business that wasn't in that space? Would you turn away a manager just for, let's say, for manufacturing at General Motors, or no? How did you focus on that?
Well, we did pick up General Motors and Ford, but we were working in their technology area. I mean, technology is everywhere. I brought in the chief technology officer for Prudential, the chief technology officer for Merrill Lynch. I brought in the COO for Capital One. We've done all the search work for Newell Rubbermaid. So as we grew, we did pick up other firms, but having that focus in technology was what really allowed us to grow, and also being focused on best practices, really understanding and listening to what clients wanted. I would always ask, and if I was sitting next to an executive, for instance, flying somewhere, and I'd always ask, how would you describe the search industry? And almost always they describe it this way: takes too long, costs too much, with inconsistent and unpredictable results. And that meant to me that there was a huge market opportunity to deliver to client needs. We started developing solutions, things that clients could see and hold. Well, we productized research. Research is incredibly important, understanding the source environments before you head off starting to recruit. And we were competing with Korn Ferry and Heidrick and companies that refused to automate. We bought our first computer, a DEC PDP 11B03, and if anyone remembers Digital Equipment, it used to be the second largest computer company. It doesn't exist anymore. And we bought that in 1982. And it took 7 years before Korn Ferry bought a computer, another 4 years before they stopped using paper files in a Rolodex and actually started using automation. So we were able to show clients source environments. We were able to track real time and make transparent everything we did. So the client would know where we've been, how we got there, and then why these individuals truly represent the very best talent in the industry. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, I think I was going to ask you a question related to that, because I'm sure when you started then, in very early 1980s, when you started, people were still using a pen and paper.
Yeah.
And they were building files by having manila folders. So I have to believe when you started, it was note cards, manila folders,
absolutely,
pads, pen and paper. And then, Jeff, I'm sure when you started, and probably still to this day, some of it is your brain. You know, your brain is still important, because sometimes people ask you for something, and by Jove, you've got the answer. And that is a really beautiful thing. But when you started, there wasn't really a database other than your folders, and you could shove people's resumes in a folder. And I have to believe once you got going, people would even send you their resume, and then you'd shove the resume in the folder, and the girls would index it in a certain way, in a certain brilliant way. But it wasn't more than a couple years, it sounds like, before you said, this is a hell of a way to run a railroad, and you started to computerize it all, which gave you a big advantage. And is that kind of the way it all transformed? It literally went from note cards to computers as you were unrolling your business.
It's funny that you mentioned note cards, because we used to have index cards. When I first started, and I was all by myself, and there were no databases, there was no research to be able to access on the internet. And technology wasn't in the Thomas Register, so you couldn't find robotics companies. So I did my own research. You know, I would ask people, I'd ask questions about, just doing it directly. What are the hot robotics companies? What are the hot CAD CAM companies? I remember when I got my first manager search, because we first were looking for groups of robotics engineers for General Electric and Westinghouse and IBM, all at the same time, who were all building, automated factories or attempting to. And I had to find out where everybody was. So I started doing my own research, and I would put robotics manufacturers, RMs, on a note card, then the name of the company, and then RUs. I would be a robotic user. And when I got my first CAD CAM search, neither the HR person nor myself knew what it stood for. And we were both too afraid to ask the hiring manager. So I spent an entire day calling around until I finally, at the end of the day, computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. I thought I, discovered a secret formula. So note cards were incredibly important. And then when we got a computer, we didn't know what to do with it. There was no one who had ever used a computer for storing resumes. So we created these skill sheets on the front of them that we would check off. And everybody in the company would take home 20 resumes every night until we got caught up. And then someone else was responsible for putting them in. We didn't know about data entry. We were just trying to figure everything out ourselves. And we were constantly looking at that. And the firms that are growing the fastest are the ones that are using technology as an advantage. And today it's all about AI.
Okay. Now, you started in Cleveland, and I take it you traveled, I'm sure, but you were here in Cleveland. And tell us about opening other offices and why you did that, how you did that, whether you needed to do that. And then was it ever a disadvantage for you to be in Cleveland? Was it ever an advantage for you to be in Cleveland?
I think it started off, I think that's a good question, Ben. I think being in Cleveland was not considered a tech mecca, right? And I remember going out to California, and I was meeting with a gentleman by the name of Joe Schoendorf. And Joe was at Excel Ventures, and he still is, and it's one of the top venture funds. He had been at Hewlett Packard, and I was out there running around. I'd already picked up all of Apple's work, like in 1989. And back then, it was just mid-level assignments. We weren't doing C-suite work yet. It was managers, directors, and VPs of hardware engineering. Eventually, we stopped doing any even director, just VP and above we were able to do. But I was out there running around, and there was a CTO search. And Joe had mentioned, he said, well, I made a presentation to him. He was too busy to see me, and said, well, Jeff, we really need somebody out here. And this is like just a couple of days before Christmas Eve. He said, we really need someone who has an office here. And I said, okay, great. I'll call you back. So I ran around. I was still out there, like in Cupertino, and I got myself a temporary office and a card and everything. So now I got an office. And can I meet with you? So I go to his house, and it's like the day before Christmas Eve. Like Christmas Eve was Saturday, Christmas was Sunday, and it was the Friday night. So everything was closed. I went and got one of those giant apples from Saks and a bottle of wine, went to his house, made the presentation. Then I fly home. And then he says, well, we want someone who lives here. and I said, well, gosh, we need an office out there just for, just for looks, basically. So we opened up an office. Our first office in California was in San Diego, just because the person we wanted to hire was in La Jolla, which did not work out. But once we opened the office in Cupertino, but I was flying out there every week. At first every other week. But anyway, what ended up happening is I lost that search, and Joe said, well, I do have someone I want to introduce you to that's going to be changing Hewlett Packard. He's going to be using search. And I knew HP never used search firms. They only hired from within. And I was Joe introduced me to Lou Platt as kind of a second prize. I didn't get the search, but here, I would like to introduce you. And that's how I ended up meeting Lou and doing, first off, half of all of HP's work, and then doing all their search work, and then doing the CEO search. So that one meeting and not having an office there and going that extra mile led to me, my career taking off.
And then where'd you have offices in your heyday when you were at your biggest? Where did you have offices?
Well, we had 15 offices, and I think that included three international, one in Ontario, or one in Toronto, one in London, one in Germany. We had not yet opened an office in Asia when I sold the firm, and we were everywhere pretty much in the U.S. We had an office in L.A., we had one in San Francisco, one in Palo Alto, Boston, New York, D.C., and we had two offices in D.C. One was D.C., one was in Maryland, Texas, Atlanta. So we're pretty much, in the major economic centers in the U.S., and we're just starting to expand globally.
How many people would you have had back then?
We grew to about 400.
Yeah. All right. Now tell us something else, and that is about, obviously you got to where you had like a a venture fund, and then you would put deals together because you knew the whole space, you knew the people. And you mentioned the other day how you got involved in the early days. This must have been at the beginning with a local company called NDOT. So how did you take your contacts and your knowledge and leverage that to get into the, totally aside from the talent, into the deal making space?
Sure. Well, I had very early on, I started a company called Technology Ventures. It's just the name that I came up with. And the reason why, I was running into entrepreneurs that needed capital and talent and couldn't get one without the other. I ran into a robotics company in Princeton, New Jersey, and I knew a venture firm in Princeton, New Jersey that was interested in investing in robotics. And we discovered very early on that we had great deal flow, that we had an ability, the way we did research, which was set us apart from competition. We were very, very thorough in our ability to capture complete candidate universes, but we could also target it as it relates to hot deals. So, and then I needed some help, and somehow, I don't even know how I found him. I was introduced to Bob Pincus, and he was at McKinsey at the time and was moonlighting. And so he became my partner, and he did a pretty good job of working with that, helping that firm write their business plan, the robotics company, and we got a fee. There was a dispute about that fee. It was about $75,000. Bob thought he deserved more. And so we agreed to part company. I had written the business plan for factory automation, taking robotics, CAD/CAM, vision systems, tactile sensing. It was the first kind of concept for bringing disparate areas of technology for an entire automated factory. And I've been writing and working on it. It was on my lap, and I was flying up to IBM in Endicott to meet, I thought, to get a search. And I was meeting with a number of their top engineering people. And on the way up, I met John Linseth. John was flying to Cornell University, where he was, benefactor. He's donated, the family's donated a lot. And I was telling him, he sat right next to me. It was a small airplane, and he had the aisle between. I'm showing him the business plan that I was writing. He said, "You ought to meet my son, Steve." And I had just got, Bob and I had just parted company. I really needed somebody because I was running the search firm. Search firm was taking off. So Steve had just gotten out of Claremont College. He was 22 or maybe 23. I was 25 because I'm 2 years older. He became my partner. Well, first I hired him as like VP. We played a couple games of tennis at the Cleveland Racquet Club. Decided that we both kind of liked each other. He's a much better tennis player than I. And so he came in to the firm, and Technology Ventures took off. We ended up doing the first deal we found was, I think it was one that I found, of the few that I found, because he ended up finding really the better deals, was a software company that was a spin out of Case Western Reserve called NDOT. It was a systems level design automation software company. And they had like 15 people or so, and they were hemorrhaging cash. They were about out of money. Steve and I'm not sure, we got a few people to write some checks, and we put up like 100,000 in to give it some runway. And we brought in Alon Oberotman as a partner of ours. So he was to be the interim chief operating officer. And we rewrote the business plan. We brought in a new salesperson. Alon was able to drive the company and really put some structure into it. Loyal Wilson is one of his first deals. Loyal put some money in. I don't remember how much, but then about a year and a half later, we sold it to Data FutureNet, and everybody made a lot of money. So that was really our first deal. And then we did Interplaque Toothbrush, which was the first toothbrush with rotating clumps of bristles. Steve found an inventor in Chicago that had a prototype. John decided to back it, asked me to build a leadership team and the board, which I did. And then that was sold to Teledyne for about $200 million, 2.5 years after inception. And then we ran into it. It's amazing. Steve happened to run into an inventor in Yale Technology Park that had a patent for reading body temperature. Do you want me to tell that story now, or should I take a break here? I can't hear you. Yep.
Go with it. Go ahead with it, Jeff.
Okay, sure. So then Steve found another inventor. I don't know how we did it. And a guy named Dr. Jacob Fraden, who was a physicist dissident from Russia and was at Yale Technology Park trying to figure out what to do with these patents. And one was for reading body temperature. Steve and I raised we went around and got checks written from people, for about $100,000 total to create a prototype. And then Steve's dad put in the real venture money, and that became Thermoscan, the first instant thermometer. We built the entire leadership team but we always had John's supervision. I think Steve and I would have fallen on our faces. We were just too young. We didn't know what we were doing. I'd never done a CEO search before. I'd never done a board search before. And John had great instincts. He just knew what to look for and what to, how to get us going and keeping us focused on what needed to be done. So we were doing anything that John asked us to do. But we built the board and the leadership team. That was sold to Thomas Lee about 2.5 years after inception, I think for $180 million. He flipped it about a year later to Braun for $300 million. John should have probably waited, but those are the two biggest deals that were ever done, by John and Steve. And then those all came out of our shop, and that's what got me on the Forbes list. By the way, it wasn't the last 4 years. It was probably about 20 years ago. I was on the Forbes list. I'd never be qualified to get on it today. And back then I wasn't qualified. I don't think I was in the top 1,000. I think they just wanted a search guy with a venture fund. By then we'd raised a fund. That's
a great story. I had no idea. I remember I was at Squire Sanders back in the day when you were working with Steve, and one day Steve called me. I didn't know Steve, and he was irate. He was the guy who liked things when he wanted them. I think he really liked the phenomenal response time. And he said he'd been told to call me, and he wondered where the warrant was. He said, "Where's the warrant?" And back then you used to courier things around. You wouldn't PDF them out. You'd courier them around. We sound like dinosaurs. And I didn't know what in the devil he was talking about when he said warrant. I really didn't even know what a warrant was. And I got educated real quick as to where the warrant was and what the warrant was. But it took about 45 minutes. And Steve was not a guy to wait. And he called and he said, "Where's that warrant?" Because he was expecting Bonnie Speed or somebody to drive it out to Chagrin, where you were office with Steve. And it took a little time for me to figure out what a warrant was, where the warrant was, get it printed off, get it to the messenger, and get it on its way to Steve. And somehow, next thing you know, he was calling Bonnie Speed to see exactly where the messenger was at.
Exactly. That's Steve.
It all worked out, and I represented Steve when he bought Ludlow Steel. That was probably his only foray into manufacturing. But it's a small world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so tell us what you're doing today exactly in the search. In other words, that was your first chapter when you went up to 300 people and blah, blah, blah. And now we're here, and it's 20, 30 years later. So what are you doing now? What are you trying to capture?
Well, we have a small family office called Talent Equity Capital. And it's really just my kids' money and a little bit of mine. But we have still investors from the fund that will do deals with us. And our primary deal right now is the online mentoring platform. It's a very, very hot space. Valuations are strong, and we hope to own this market. There's about 1 million recruiting firms in the US and another 1 million globally, just starving for knowledge on how to rapidly scale their firm, which, having built the only rapid scaling search firm that grew organically, which is we never bought a company, we never raised money, we never borrowed money. We figured out a way to create a platform to mentor young people to turn into $1 million producers in a relatively short period of time. So we have a new company called C-Suite Recruiter, and we're getting ready to launch the online version of that product. Jeff Christian Partners is a family of best practice firms. We are bringing together a number of firms in a major consolidation play from mostly, actually the first few firms are all in the UK. one in the Netherlands, and then two of them here in the U.S. But the bigger firms that are joining us are in Europe right now, and we're looking to capture the same market that we had done at C&T. We built, again, I took about 7 years to really understand the market today and what I needed to do to build best practice platforms that sat above all competition, which is really what we did at C&T. The only way that we could get noticed in technology in Cleveland is if we screamed louder and that we actually had something that others didn't. So we had something called Universe 100, which was our proprietary research capability. I still own that. I own the trademark and I own the intellectual property of Universe 100. And we've been able to, the market right now in search is on fire. And since we had done, and I've maintained many of the relationships, we started about 2 years ago, really pretty much staying under the radar back in the search business. And now it's taken off. So we're scaling again. It's different this time though. Everybody's remote access. So there's not a need to have expensive real estate all over the place, which I hated to begin with. I hated, expensive leases. And so we're doing it again. We're doing what we think will end up kind of being known as Christian & Timbers 2.0. And we're going after that same space that sits between all the boutiques and the majors. Companies don't really like the majors. Majors do poor quality work. They're very transaction oriented. The client gets lost, particularly in the public firms, because they're trying to serve themselves. They're trying to serve the public, and there's really no space for the client. And they're too big to serve clients as well as boutiques can. But boutiques don't have a big enough brand to be able to get to everyone. So we've got a very strong brand, and we hope to have that same space between the boutiques and the large firms as the kind of global best practice leader.
Perfect. Now, let me see if Eric, do you have any questions coming from the audience? Because we're going to run out of time in about another 10 minutes. And I want to give our participants an opportunity to ask a few questions.
Yeah, we do have a question. I have to scroll back here. So Chris Millen, who Jeff incidentally is a recruiter as well, has a question. He says, Jeff, where do you envision the industry going the next 5 to 10 years?
Thanks, Chris. Great question. Well, AI is the most disruptive force that we can think of. And so technology is going to be biting off chunks of the business. There are literally thousands of brilliant people targeting this market with technology solutions. And however, the market in technology is growing so fast that we are in probably the fastest growing market for the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, because technology touches everything. It doesn't matter what industry. If you're in chemicals, there's technology. And, we kind of accept that there's a technology in every company. We're going to accept that there's going to be AI in every company. So we have a pace of new innovation and technology that anyone in search can focus in a new market. We've called it follow the money. And in fact, if you want to, Chris, take the free course on jeffchristian.com. It'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. But going after new markets, going on to Crunchbase and finding where the investors are investing, and there's such great opportunities. So I think that the contingent world is going to be replaced. There's too many people targeting it. But it's so hard to believe it today because there's so much demand. But I think the protected markets are the higher level relationship driven markets. Talent acquisition teams are buying technology and are trying to replace having to pay fees to search firms. So those are some of the things that I think are going to happen over the next few years.
I have another question. Thank you, Jeff. I have another question now. We try to bring people together here at the Center for Free Enterprise. We try to do what you're a master of, Jeff, and that is to bring people, ideas, and capital together in our own crude way. So you're a very busy man. Who should contact you after they watch this video? Should if somebody has what they believe to be a promising startup, do you have any time to hear about that? If
Sure.
somebody feels they're talented, should they send you their resume? Who should contact you? Who can you help or benefit from knowing yourself? Just thinking about it in that light.
Well, we never know where opportunity lies. I mean, I didn't, if I hadn't hired Steve, I would have never been on the Forbes Midas list, and I never would have had the opportunity to do those things. And people that I've hired and that have grown up to be important parts of the company, like Chip McCreary. So I'm always interested in meeting young people, people of any age, really, that have a fire in their stomach to do something special, do things that everybody says can't be done. So we're a growing company. We're always looking for talent ourselves. And I'm always interested in meeting entrepreneurs. And I, mostly in technology. I'm not a consumer products guy, though we did do 2 consumer products, but they were consumer electronic products, the toothbrush and the thermometer. So yeah, I'd be happy to hear from anyone. In terms of job seekers, I can't always help. I don't, we have to be doing a search. But entrepreneurs, we're always willing to help in any way we can. And if someone wants to send a resume, I will do my best to get it in the hands of someone that can help you if there's something if I'm not working on a project that's applicable.
Yeah. Now, do you only work for large companies, or you work for companies large and small?
Well, we do a lot of work for startups. Startups are amazing now. They're what's called unicorns. These are startups that are, 15 people raising money at more than $1 billion. And so I've always worked with startups. And so working with early stage companies is about half of our business. The other half are mid-sized to very large corporations.
Okay, great.
Hey,
Wait,
Doug.
you see,
Hey,
go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
another question from the group, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
great.
Okay.
Great.
Jeff, Ken Keeler, leader over at Media Finance Services, has a question. He says, where do you see the shift back from remote shaking out, and how will remote impact the recruiting market for talent?
I don't see it shifting back. My son is started at Amazon at 19 as a software developer, then came home and helped build this platform, the C-Suite Recruiter platform. And also he did a cryptocurrency hedge fund, which turned out to be, we should have put more money in it, to be quite a home run. But then got a job at Uber as a senior software developer in San Francisco. And he had to get in a very expensive apartment so that he wanted to be close by to walk there. And he was eating all of his meals there, and everything was fine until the pandemic, and he sent everybody home. So we flew him back home, and he's been flying around. He's in Miami right now. He does about 2 hours of work a day, and he's trying to figure out where he wants to live. He's been to 3 or 4. He's been to Los Angeles. He has seen his girlfriend in Switzerland. Was finally able to spend about 2 months with her, but he gets all his work done remotely, and I don't think they're ever bringing people back. So there's a huge chunk of the world that's going to be working this way. There's no reason to pay for real estate, and some people enjoy it much more. And we were in that trend anyway. So I think recruiting, we're going to find that companies like ourselves that don't need to spend a lot of money on real estate, though we'll have offices. If people want them, we'll have them. We've never invested in the Park Avenue offices. We were on Lexington in the old GE building when we had an office in New York. So I think it's changing dramatically, and firms have been hiring people without ever seeing them. They've done all the reference checking, all the interviewing, everything. These are executives. So we've jumped into a new world that I don't think we can easily jump back from.
I have another question from Greg Wayna, and if I mispronounced your last name, Greg, forgive me. Greg's an advisor to boards of directors. His question is, in the days of Christian and Timbers, boards were looking for CEOs with industry and functional skill sets, which were quantifiable from reviewing a career progression. Today, boards are much more interested in CEO soft skills of servant leadership, mentorship, coaching, etc. How does the executive search community vet soft skills while maintaining confidentiality?
Well, I've always been, and the reason why I did Steve Jobs' last 2 board searches, brought the first woman onto Apple's board, did the CEO search for HP and others, was because of the ability to recognize. What I like to say is that people hire for experience and fire for human qualities. Why don't we do the reverse? And if you have a chance to read the book, I talk about the Formula 7 or something back then. And today, I was on the phone with, we're doing videos last night on, I'm working on 4 board searches today. They're all for women. We call our board services practice Balanced Director, meaning that we kind of refuse to do something to look for a diverse person. That doesn't even make sense. There's no such thing as a diverse person. But if I'm looking for a woman, I'm going to be gender biased. If I'm looking for someone of color, I'm going to be racially biased. So all of our slates are balanced. And I'm always looking for the same thing. Number 1 is honesty and integrity, shared values. I did a bunch of research after having interviewed 40 to 50 of the highest performing CEOs in the world, because I was doing so many of the top searches at one particular point in time, as well as the up and coming. And I found common threads for them. And so I look for those things. Number 2, I look for people that are incredibly bright, but we're not talking about, kind of book smart, and we're not talking about clever. I'm talking about people that can find multiple critical paths through complex problems. And number 3, I'm looking for leadership models and repeatable leadership models. And they themselves are talent engineers. They always have a following. They instinctively know how to mentor and grow extraordinarily high performance teams. I'm looking for people that have a sense of humility and teachability. People have to be able to learn. And what I say is that only learning people can build learning companies, and only learning companies grow. And so I really delve into that. I've never spent hardly any time on experience. I don't think it's that important. Someone was always something else before they were on a fast track and moving forward. I don't know if that sometime I might be able to offer some more on that, but I've created the 60 human qualities, traits, behaviors, scenario reactions of what I call transformational CEOs, those that always win. And I found consistent behaviors. The first thing I noticed is of these transformational CEOs when you meet them, and everyone listening may be able to relate, is that the first thing you notice is they're incredibly likable. And for some reason, it's genuine. They kind of wear that on their sleeve. Number 2, they ooze credibility, that honesty and integrity. And just somehow, this is a good human being. Those are the first 2 things that I notice about a transformational CEO. Great leader.
Yeah, we got to wrap this up soon, but I have a question. I'm just curious how you view the impact of LinkedIn. Is it a disruptor? Is it a tool? Is it a positive in your industry?
No, yeah, it's amazing. We kind of broke the code about 3 years ago. I was mentoring a guy in Florida who was 72. He had bought a management recruiter franchise. At one time, he had 30 people. He was down to none and had no revenue. And he had no idea how to use, he could use his personal computer, but he didn't even know what was going on with LinkedIn. And neither did I. I had 6,000 connections or something, but and they really weren't my clients and candidates. They were just kind of people that I, somehow accumulated over time. And I didn't really know how to use it, but I was learning that people were really, the more sophisticated search firms were definitely leveraging LinkedIn. So I went on a mission to figure it out. And we send out 880 invite messages every week. We do about, I think it's 140 or so a day that are targeted for different recruiting assignments. And we have all these different systems and software that we use. We've always been automating outreach. And when at C&T towards the end, I had about a 15 to $20 million annual revenue engine that fed everybody. I fed a lot of the people in the firm, which was great. I love to have it. And we've built that again. But back then, that was on a voice messaging platform and email platform. And again, we're doing things that other people weren't, and we're looking at ways of automating things. And so today it's on social media platforms. Today it's on LinkedIn, but also people are using Slack. They're using Instagram. And the kids that are growing up that are going to be the CEOs of the future are going to be on different platforms. But LinkedIn's it really owns it. I have a fear sometimes that someday, because they serve so much of the recruiting world, that they're going to like flip a switch and we're all going to be out of business. They're just learning from us and watching what we're doing. But they've proven they're not that smart. Microsoft owns them, and they're kind of not given the resources they need. Their customer service is terrible. So I think we don't have to worry about them for a while.
Well, we have no more questions, and we're rounding out the hour. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, Jeff, for sharing your time, your expertise, and your story. Really, really great stuff. Ben, do you have any closing comments?
No, I just feel that, Jeff, it was very nice of you to accept our invitation, and your story should be an inspiration for all of us. And hopefully we can have a few people to reach out for you, and, good things can happen.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for asking me. It was a pleasure to meet both of you virtually here.
Pleasure's mine.
Take care. Thank you.